The Autobahn law that never lets you run on empty. Germany is a country famous for engineering, precision, rules, order, and a motorway system so iconic it has become shorthand for freedom, speed, and no-limits driving. The Autobahn is more than a collection of roads. It's a cultural symbol, a point of national pride, a piece of modern mythology. Tourists visit Germany for the castles, beer and sausages. Car enthusiasts visit for one thing: the chance to drive on a motorway where huge stretches have no speed limit at all. But buried inside the extensive rulebook that governs these motorways is a law so surprising that it often gets confused for folklore. Many hear it and assume it must be a joke, a misunderstanding, or an exaggerated myth created by tourists, that running out of fuel on the Autobahn is illegal. And yet it is absolutely, unmistakably, 100% real. Not a rumour, not a misinterpretation, not a quirky, outdated regulation from another era. It is written firmly and clearly within the Straßenverkehrsordnung, Germany's road traffic laws, that running out of petrol on an Autobahn is considered verboten because it constitutes an avoidable obstruction. In other words, you knew your tank was getting low. You had options. You should have planned. Your car stopping at 200 kilometers per hour is not a random act of fate. It is avoidable negligence. This law has roots that stretch back through decades of German road culture, and to understand why it exists, you have to understand what the Autobahn really is. Not the stereotype sold in car magazines or travel programs, but the reality. A finely tuned organism, a synchronized ballet of machinery and discipline, where every driver is expected to uphold their part of the pact. It is a place where cars frequently travel at speeds that would make most countries faint, and where stopping on the roadway is considered one of the most dangerous acts a driver can commit. That danger is why Germany cracked down on preventable stops. To Germans, running out of fuel on the Autobahn is not a harmless mistake. It is a failure of responsibility. If you are going to drive fast, you must plan fast. You must think ahead. You must respect the precision that makes the system possible. But to understand how this idea became law, we must step back into the origins of the Autobahn itself. The story begins long before modern BMWs and sleek Mercedes, long before satellite navigation systems tell you exactly how many kilometers you have left before your tank becomes dangerously empty. The idea of high-speed motor roads in Germany predates the 20th century, with early discussions and planning beginning long before most people even owned a car. In the 1920s and 1930s, the Autobahn began to take shape. It was born at a time when motor vehicles represented the future, and Germany wanted to be at the forefront of that future. Wide, straight roads across the countryside were viewed as a symbol of modernity, progress, and national strength. When the Autobahn network expanded in the post-war decades, Germany developed a driving culture built on rules, strict training and mutual trust. German drivers take their licensing process incredibly seriously. Intensive courses, multiple exams and rigorous instruction build a mindset of responsibility. The Autobahn reflects that mindset. It is not chaos. It is controlled speed. A system that works only because the people within it respect it. And that brings us to the core of the issue. Stopping on the Autobahn is extremely dangerous. When cars travel at such high speeds, the margin for error becomes razor thin. A stationary vehicle on the shoulder is not merely an inconvenience. It is a potential disaster. German road safety officials realized early on that preventable stops must be reduced as much as humanly possible. Cars break down, that is unavoidable. Tires burst, engines overheat, mechanical failures happen, but running out of fuel, that is different. That is a choice, a preventable act, a failure of planning in a country that prizes preparation. So the law was written with a simple philosophy. You do not stop on the Autobahn unless you absolutely must. And running out of petrol is not one of those situations. Most countries treat running out of fuel as an embarrassing inconvenience. In Germany, it is something you can be fined for, because stopping where cars move at tremendous speeds puts lives at risk. The penalty is not severe, usually a fine, but the point is clear. This is not something the system tolerates. Drivers learn this rule early, and it becomes second nature. Before entering an Autobahn, Germans check their fuel levels as instinctively as they check their mirrors. They plan their journeys and watch their indicators, because the idea of stopping on the shoulder is so deeply ingrained as unacceptable that most would be horrified at the thought. There is a cultural component to this as well, a subtle but important piece of the German psyche. The Autobahn is not just a road, it is a shared responsibility. Each driver is expected to do their part to keep it safe. Germans often speak about the Autobahn with a seriousness that might seem humorous to outsiders, but makes perfect sense once you drive there. It feels like a well-oiled machine, and no one wants to be the one person who throws a wrench into the gears. Over the decades, countless tourists have discovered this law the hard way. Car rentals sputtering to a halt near a rest area, American families who assumed petrol stations on the Autobahn appear as often as fast food signs on an American interstate, British tourists who misunderstood their car's fuel gauge, drivers who overestimated how far the next station was, all discovering an unpleasant truth. Running out of fuel is not just embarrassing, it is punishable. Many nations would simply call a tow truck and be done with it. But Germany's stance is rooted in something deeper. The Autobahn is fast, efficient and safe because the rules are clear and firm. Safety does not come from speed limits. It comes from consistency, from predictability, from the understanding that every driver is performing at a certain standard. Of course, this does not mean Germans lack humour about it. Germans are fully aware that the idea of being fined for an empty tank sounds absurd to outsiders. And because German humour tends to be dry, understated and self-aware, many will laugh at the stereotype that Germany has a law for everything. But this is one law they take seriously, not out of pedantic rigidity, but because they know exactly what can happen on a motorway designed for velocities most countries never allow. The Autobahn is a masterpiece of engineering. It is designed to absorb massive volumes of traffic with remarkable smoothness. Its construction is meticulous, thick layers of asphalt engineered for stability, gentle curves, long sight lines and efficient signage. But its magic does not come from engineering alone. It comes from discipline, from drivers who understand the responsibility that comes with freedom. The absence of speed limits on many sections is not a lack of rules, it is a sign of trust. And trust only works when everyone respects the system. The prohibition on running out of fuel is therefore part of that invisible agreement. You are free to drive fast, free to experience a level of roadway efficiency unmatched around the world, free to enjoy that famous Autobahn exhilaration, as long as you do not jeopardize the flow. It is one of the few traffic rules that instantly reveals a difference in driving culture between Germany and much of the rest of the world. In some places, running out of petrol on a highway is a minor annoyance. In Germany, it is a violation of the social contract. To understand how deeply ingrained this mindset is, you only need to spend some time at a German rest area. Drivers fuel up even when their tank is half full. They check tire pressure. They clean their windshields. They prepare. This is what the Autobahn demands. Not fear, but maturity. And yet, despite its seriousness, the law has taken on a kind of mythic charm. It gets shared online as one of those strange but true facts about foreign countries, often with the implication that Germans must be excessively strict. But when you look at the history, the culture, and the logic driving the law, it becomes clear that this is not strictness for the sake of strictness. It is safety in its most elegant form, prevention over reaction. For many, the existence of this law becomes a window into how Germany approaches public systems. Thoughtfully, thoroughly, design first, disaster last. It reveals a country that sees driving not as a chaotic, everyday task, but as a shared, coordinated activity. And as the Autobahn continues to evolve with new sections, smarter technologies and more efficient designs, the old rule remains. It has survived changing governments, shifting policies, new generations and new automotive trends. It endures because the principle behind it has never changed. A stopped car on a high-speed motorway is one of the most dangerous obstacles imaginable. And if that stop is preventable, the law insists it should never happen. Whether you find the rule amusing, baffling, or brilliantly logical, one thing is certain. The Autobahn is the only place in the world where your fuel tank isn't just a personal responsibility, it's a legal obligation. Why Germany enforces the no empty tank on the Autobahn rule. The thing about the Autobahn is that it isn't merely a road system, it's a philosophy. A living example of how German infrastructure, engineering and social expectations collide to create an environment that is simultaneously fast, orderly and astonishingly safe. And to maintain that safety, Germany treats preventable risks with almost scientific precision. When people hear that you can be fined for running out of fuel on the Autobahn, their first reaction is usually laughter, then disbelief, then curiosity. Why is Germany so strict about something that in many places is brushed off as a harmless mishap? To understand how Germany enforces this rule, you first have to understand the Autobahn police, known officially as the Autobahnpolizei. These officers are not just traffic police. They are specialists who patrol one of the most intense driving environments in the world. Their work requires a level of alertness and training that is a world apart from the average highway patrol. They respond to collisions at high speeds, coordinate rescue services in seconds, and enforce rules designed to prevent tragedies before they happen. If an officer finds a car stopped on the Autobahn, the assumption is immediately serious. Either the driver has had a mechanical breakdown or something dangerous has occurred. But if the officer approaches and discovers the car has run out of petrol, the tone changes. The situation is no longer an unavoidable emergency. It is, in their eyes, a preventable obstruction. And that word, obstruction, is the key to understanding the entire law. German driving regulations categorize anything that stops the flow of traffic as a hazard. The Autobahn relies on smooth, predictable movement. When the average vehicle is travelling at 130 kilometers per hour or more, a stationary car, even on the shoulder, creates turbulence in the traffic pattern. Vehicles must shift, slow, or change lanes abruptly. The risk spreads outward in a chain reaction. This, historically, is where accidents happen. German officials realized something decades ago. Eliminate preventable stops, and you inherently eliminate a massive portion of potential accidents. So the law is not about punishing people with an empty tank. It is about shaping behavior so that empty tanks become rare. The enforcement itself is practical rather than dramatic. Drivers are not dragged off in handcuffs for an empty fuel tank. Instead, an officer will document the incident, confirm that the stop was avoidable, and issue a fine. The amount is not devastating, usually comparable to a pricey dinner in Berlin, but it sends a clear message. The real punishment is the embarrassment. Germans take great pride in being competent motorists. To run out of petrol on the Autobahn is like forgetting your own birthday. It is socially mortifying. Yet stories do emerge, usually involving tourists who underestimate the distances between petrol stations. The Autobahn generally has service areas spread at reasonable intervals, but the intervals are still longer than what many non-European drivers expect. Visitors from countries where gas stations appear every few minutes often assume Germany works the same way. They assume wrong. One of the more commonly repeated incidents involves an American couple in the early 2000s who were driving from Munich to Nuremberg. They had rented a car and wanted to experience the full Autobahn speed. They raced past signs, loved every minute of it, but ignored the fuel gauge slowly retreating toward empty. When the engine sputtered and died on the shoulder, their adventure took a sharp turn into German bureaucracy. A patrol car arrived within minutes. The officer asked the man why he had stopped. When the driver confessed they had run out of fuel, the officer stared at him in disbelief, as if he had just admitted he'd tried to cook a bratwurst on the engine block. The fine was issued. The couple paid it, bemused and slightly shaken, and later told reporters it was the most German thing that ever happened. But perhaps the most illustrative examples involve German drivers themselves. When a German runs out of petrol, it is seen not as an unfortunate moment, but as a lapse in personal discipline. There is a cultural expectation that you will prepare. Germans plan meticulously. They review routes, check distances, and examine their vehicle before long journeys. In this context, running out of petrol suggests you failed the preparation exam, and the Autobahn is not a place where such failure is easily forgiven. The law has led to some fascinating ripple effects in driving culture. Service stations near Autobahn entrances sell fuel at a premium, and yet they remain busy because German drivers prefer to fill up early rather than risk the shame and danger of rolling to a stop. Rental car companies often remind international travellers of the rule, though this reminder typically arrives in a rapid burst of information that few tourists absorb. Road signs warn drivers to ensure they have sufficient fuel. Driving schools hammer the importance of readiness into new students. It's an entire infrastructure of reinforcement built around a single principle: do not become a hazard. But the enforcement goes beyond fines. Imagine you do run out of fuel. The first thing the German system demands is immediate safety protocol. Hazard lights, reflective vests, and a warning triangle placed on the roadway behind the car at the required distance. In Germany, these triangles are not optional. Every car is required to have one. They are symbols of the nation's deeply ingrained respect for safety. If you do not set your triangle correctly, you may receive an additional fine. If you stand too close to traffic, you may receive advice so stern it feels like a punishment. Germans do not take roadside safety lightly. Once the scene is secure, the driver must walk to the nearest service area or emergency phone. Many stretches of the Autobahn have emergency telephones placed at regular interval quality, usually every couple thousand meters. If you have to walk to one because your car ran out of fuel, this journey becomes part of the penalty. The walk is often long, exposed and humbling. The bright orange phone stands like a monument to poor planning, reminding you that the German government anticipated your mistake decades before you made it. When you finally reach assistance, the system springs into action with its trademark efficiency. A technician or tow service arrives, refuels your car, and gets you moving again. The process is quick, clinical, and designed to minimize risk to other drivers. Every second your car remains stopped is a second the entire Autobahn ecosystem is under strain. The interesting thing about enforcement is that Germany doesn't treat this law as an oddity. It is simply part of the rules of the road. Germans rarely discuss it unless someone asks, usually with the same tone as if they were asking why you shouldn't text while driving. For them, the logic is obvious. To outsiders, it is fascinating precisely because it reveals something profound about how Germany views civil responsibility. One of the most striking aspects of this law is the way it contrasts with systems in other countries. In many places, motorists treat highways casually, stopping for snacks, pulling over when they feel tired, or letting the fuel gauge flirt with empty because they assume a petrol station is always nearby. The Autobahn does not operate on these assumptions. There is a seriousness to it because the stakes are higher. When speeds rise, risks multiply, and so do the expectations placed on drivers. Germany's approach is in many ways a reflection of how it views public life. Rules exist not to restrict people, but to protect the collective. Freedom is given generously. In this case, the freedom to drive at exhilarating speeds. But that freedom comes with responsibility. High-speed sections of the Autobahn are not a chaotic free-for-all. They are a testament to what disciplined driving can achieve. Every rule that supports this discipline is treated as part of a delicate balance. This is why the no empty tank regulation persists. It supports a system that works remarkably well. Germany has some of the safest roads in Europe, despite having some of the fastest. This is not a coincidence. And ask any German driver what they think of the law, and you will probably hear the same response delivered with a blend of practicality and gentle scolding. Why would you run out of fuel in the first place? The enforcement also reveals an interesting cultural paradox. Germans are often stereotyped as rule-obsessed, but the Autobahn shows something more nuanced. They are not obsessed with rules for their own sake. They are obsessed with rules that make sense. Many parts of the Autobahn do not have speed limits. This is not because Germany lacks rules. It is because Germany trusts drivers to operate within a system that has been carefully built around their behavior. In a sense, the lack of speed limits is made possible by the presence of strict rules elsewhere, including the rule about fuel. There is another layer to consider: liability. If a driver runs out of fuel and their stopped vehicle contributes to an accident, the legal consequences can be severe. German courts take a firm stance on preventable hazards. Insurance companies do not look kindly upon negligence. The fine for running out of fuel might be small, but the financial and legal fallout from causing an accident can be substantial. Yet, despite its serious implications, the law still carries a certain comedic charm. Tourists tell stories of trying to explain to officers why they didn't notice the fuel gauge. Locals laugh about how their grandfather still fills up when his tank is 3/4 full. Just in case. The idea of a country where driving fast is permitted but running out of petrol is illegal feels like something invented by a satirical writer. And yet it fits perfectly within the German mindset. Efficiency above all. Preparation before pleasure. Germany enforces this law not because it wants to punish, but because it wants to prevent. It is a law built on the idea that responsibility is shared, that infrastructure is only as strong as the people who use it, and that safety is often as simple as avoiding unnecessary risks. And when those risks involve machines travelling at extraordinary speeds, even a simple mistake like an empty fuel tank becomes a matter of public concern. What makes the rule so fascinating is that it captures the essence of the Autobahn itself. Discipline and freedom working together in perfect balance. The ban on running out of fuel is not an arbitrary regulation. It is one cog in a vast, intricate system designed to make high-speed driving not only possible, but safe. And while it may sound humorous at first, the truth is that Germany's enforcement of this rule reflects something important: the recognition that order is what makes freedom sustainable. The Autobahn is fast not because Germans enjoy chaos, but because they build systems where chaos has no room to grow. Modern misunderstandings and the culture around the empty tank law. If there is one thing that unites visitors from around the world, it is the universal assumption that running out of fuel is a simple accident. Something inconvenient, mildly embarrassing, but ultimately harmless. A momentary lapse, the sort of thing people laugh about later when telling friends the story of their road trip. But in Germany, especially on the Autobahn, such a lapse is treated with the same gravitas as leaving a pot boiling unattended, or deciding to balance a television on a pile of loose books. It is viewed not as an accident, but as a breach of duty. And this creates an endlessly fascinating cultural collision when tourists encounter the German attitude for the first time. The modern misunderstanding begins long before people reach the Autobahn. It starts with the global mythology surrounding it. The Autobahn has become the unofficial celebrity of highway systems. Travellers hear stories of sections where no speed limit exists, where gleaming German cars fly across asphalt like silver arrows in a medieval tournament. They imagine themselves cruising at exhilarating speeds, the landscape a blur, the adrenaline pulsing, the freedom intoxicating. And to be fair, the reality is not far off. Certain stretches of the Autobahn do allow drivers to reach speeds they would never dare attempt in their own countries. But this mystique has a side effect. The myths obscure the fact that the Autobahn has rules, and those rules are enforced with a seriousness that catches unprepared drivers off guard. Tourists often assume that if a country allows you to drive as fast as your vehicle permits, surely it must be relaxed about other aspects of driving. But the Autobahn is not a playground. It is a carefully engineered system that requires both discipline and awareness. And this is where the dissonance emerges. While tourists may be excited to experience the thrill of free speed, Germans remain focused on maintaining order. The two perspectives coexist awkwardly at times, particularly when visitors find themselves in situations where cultural expectations clash with asphalt reality. The most common source of confusion arises when tourists rent cars. Rental agencies in Germany are efficient, but their explanations can be rapid, dense, and delivered by employees juggling half a dozen customers at once. Somewhere between signing the insurance form and choosing between a manual or automatic transmission, the agent may mention something about ensuring the tank never runs low on the Autobahn. But the warning often sounds like a generic piece of advice rather than a legal imperative. Tourists nod, smile, sign the papers, and wander off imagining their forthcoming cinematic experience. Then the real Autobahn introduces itself. Modern German motorists know their infrastructure intimately. They understand the spacing of service stations, the geography of rest stops, the placement of emergency telephones, the traffic patterns at different times of day. They know the rhythms of the highway like a seasoned sailor knows the sea. Meanwhile, the average tourist's knowledge begins and ends with the idea that you can go really fast. And so the misunderstandings begin. Consider the design of the Autobahn itself. For long stretches, there is nothing but forest, fields, and the occasional sound barrier. The presence of petrol stations is not constant. They appear at intervals, sometimes generous, sometimes sparse, depending on the region. Visitors from countries where petrol stations cluster along highways like roadside mushrooms often assume a refill is always 5 minutes away. And because this assumption is based on experience, it feels natural. They have no reason to suspect Germany operates differently until the fuel gauge dips lower than expected. By the time the warning light comes on, the next service station may still be kilometers away. The Autobahn's efficiency becomes its own trap. High speeds burn fuel more quickly, and in a rental car with unfamiliar consumption rates, the gauge can drop like a stone. Modern navigation systems do show fuel stations, but not all tourists check. Some rely on The result is that visitors occasionally find themselves coasting onto the shoulder, baffled by the sudden silence under the hood. And once the car is stopped, reality arrives in the form of an officer or emergency service technician who has seen this exact scenario play out hundreds of times. The cultural divide becomes most apparent in those moments. To the tourist, the situation seems like a simple mishap. To the German responder, it appears as a textbook case of preventable danger. And the conversation that follows often contains a blend of politeness, surprise, and bewilderment on both sides. The modern German attitude toward the empty tank law reveals something deeper about national identity. Germans internalize rules not because they enjoy restrictions, but because they see rules as the invisible scaffolding that makes complex systems function smoothly. And the Autobahn is perhaps the most beloved of those systems. It is not merely a road network, it is a point of pride, a symbol of precision, efficiency, and high performance. To treat the Autobahn carelessly is viewed as a kind of cultural disrespect, even if the person doing so is unaware of the significance. This mindset explains why running out of fuel is considered a preventable failure rather than an unfortunate accident. German drivers take responsibility seriously. They plan trips with attention to detail. They keep mental notes of refueling points. They listen for subtle engine sounds, watch the weather, and prepare for contingencies. This level of attentiveness is part of the reason the Autobahn's safety record remains astonishingly strong. German drivers are not perfect, but the collective expectation of competence shapes the entire driving environment. The empty tank law also plays an important role in shaping behaviour. It exists not primarily as a punishment, but as a reminder. A nudge from the government saying, stay alert, stay prepared, and do not let negligence put others at risk. Modern Germany has doubled down on this approach with increasing clarity. Driving schools emphasize the rule. Road signs advise drivers to fuel up before entering long stretches of motorway. Even newer petrol stations have interactive reminders posted near the pumps, warning about the consequences of failing to refuel at appropriate intervals. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the modern era is how the law interacts with technology. German cars and foreign rentals are now equipped with fuel range indicators, navigation systems, real-time traffic updates, and sensors designed to warn drivers long before the tank runs dangerously low. And yet the problem persists enough that the law remains relevant. Because no matter how advanced the car becomes, it cannot override human distraction, excitement, or misjudgment. There are moments today when the Autobahn Polizei encounter drivers who insist they didn't realize the tank was empty because the range indicator said they could travel further. The officers listen patiently. Then they explain that indicators are estimates, not guarantees, and that the responsibility ultimately rests with the person behind the wheel. Modern convenience, in other words, does not excuse old-fashioned negligence. Despite all this seriousness, the empty tank law has developed an odd form of celebrity within travel circles. Travel bloggers mention it. YouTube channels discuss it. TikTok clips dramatize it. Some even challenge the law by attempting to drive long stretches of Autobahn while keeping the tank perilously low, hoping to document how far they can push their luck. These stunts, unsurprisingly, are frowned upon by authorities. The Autobahn is not the place for viral content. But the fascination persists because the rule feels like one of those quirks of German life that blends practicality with a faint hint of authoritarian absurdity. The comedic part of this obsession is that many foreigners believe the law is much harsher than it actually is. Some think drivers are arrested on the spot. Others think cars are confiscated. Some even believe running out of fuel results in a ban from the Autobahn. None of this is true. The law is simply a fine, and a modest one at that. But the myth-making around it has taken on a life of its own, and Germany seems content to let the exaggerations circulate. If tourists arrive with the belief that the Autobahn is a place where mistakes are severely punished, they will likely behave more cautiously, which only contributes to overall safety. Modern German drivers view the law as a natural part of the driving landscape, rarely worth discussing unless prompted. Ask a German about it, and they will usually respond with a shrug. Of course, it is illegal, they say. Why would it not be illegal? To them, it is no stranger than requiring people to wear seatbelts or prohibiting texting while driving. The idea of a driver failing to keep their tank at a reasonable level feels like a sign of carelessness incompatible with the Autobahn ethos. There is another cultural aspect people overlook. The Autobahn represents a social contract. Germany trusts drivers with speed, and in return, drivers are expected to maintain high levels of responsibility. If the Autobahn were limited to low speeds, perhaps running out of fuel would not be a major issue. But at high speeds, predictability becomes essential. Every car must be accounted for. Every stop must be intentional. Every movement must be deliberate. When a vehicle stops unexpectedly because someone misjudged their remaining petrol, the entire contract is violated. Modern German society has embraced the idea that personal freedom thrives best when supported by thoughtful constraints. And the Autobahn stands as a monument to this belief. The rule forbidding empty tanks is not an attempt to punish drivers, but to keep the system functioning. It reflects a worldview where preventing accidents is more important than assigning blame afterward. And this preventative mindset is not limited to roads. It permeates many aspects of German governance. But while Germans understand this instinctively, visitors often need time to adjust. The idea that a highway can impose responsibility on its users feels novel, perhaps even alien, to those accustomed to roads designed with more flexibility. And yet, Once tourists begin to grasp the logic behind the law, they often develop a newfound appreciation for the Autobahn. What initially felt strict becomes sensible. What initially seemed harsh becomes reasonable. They come to see that the Autobahn's magic lies not only in its speed, but in its discipline. In the modern day, stories continue to circulate about tourists who ignore fuel gauges, drivers who overestimate their car's efficiency, and adventurers who assume that rules don't apply to them because they are merely passing through. The Autobahn corrects them swiftly, sometimes with a fine, sometimes with a long walk to an emergency phone, sometimes with the stern advice of an officer who has heard every excuse imaginable. And yet Germany treats these incidents not with anger, but with firm practicality. The culture surrounding this law reveals something profound about the Autobahn's identity. It is not merely a road. It is a carefully controlled environment where extraordinary freedom is possible because ordinary carelessness is minimized. Every rule supports the integrity of the system, and the prohibition against running out of fuel is one of the simplest yet most essential of these rules. The modern misunderstandings will likely continue, fueled by travel videos, social media posts, and the enduring allure of a highway where speed becomes a kind of national art form. Tourists will continue to rent cars, chase adrenaline, and occasionally forget that fuel gauges matter. And the Autobahn will continue to respond with efficiency, patience, and the steady application of a rule that makes perfect sense in a world that values safety and responsibility. The story of the empty tank law is ultimately a story about how modern Germany sees itself. A nation that values precision. A culture that respects systems. A society that understands the relationship between freedom and responsibility. And an infrastructure that works because the people who use it are expected to meet it halfway. How the rules survived reunification and became part of Germany's national driving culture. When Germany reunified in October of 1990, the country found itself facing a massive administrative task, merging two entirely different legal systems into one cohesive framework. East Germany had its own traffic regulations, its own road culture, and its own approach to public safety. West Germany, by contrast, had refined its Autobahn system for decades, evolving a driving culture that was simultaneously strict, efficient, and deeply respected. During this period of administrative fusion, lawmakers had to examine thousands of regulations and decide which ones would survive in a newly unified Germany. The prohibition against running out of fuel on the Autobahn was among the many rules considered. But unlike some laws that were retired or restructured, this one remained firmly in place. The reason is simple. By the time reunification occurred, the no empty tank rule was no longer just a regulation. It had become part of West Germany's cultural backbone. It was seen as self-evident, almost intuitive, and absolutely necessary to maintain safety on high-speed motorways. It reflected a worldview that Germans widely shared, a belief that preparation is a moral obligation, not merely a suggestion. And so, as legal committees sorted through conflicting rules, this particular regulation barely attracted discussion. It was adopted as part of the newly unified nation's standard traffic code, seamlessly woven into the legal fabric of modern Germany. At the time, East German citizens were encountering the Autobahn system in its fully developed Western form for the first time. Their roads had been adequate but modest, and many were not designed for sustained high-speed travel. East German cars, too, were built with simpler engineering. The iconic Trabant, for all its nostalgic charm, was not exactly designed for the aerodynamic fury of the Autobahn. And so the reunified nation found itself in an unusual moment where entire communities had to adapt to an entirely new way of driving. They learned quickly that the Autobahn was not simply a highway, but a culture. And within that culture, running out of fuel was more than an inconvenience. It was a breach of trust. German driving culture in the years after reunification became a kind of national project. The state invested heavily in improving eastern roads, upgrading infrastructure, and standardizing safety expectations. German driving instructors were suddenly teaching a generation of drivers who had grown up under a different set of norms. And among the many lessons, the importance of maintaining adequate fuel stood out. The rule against empty tanks became a symbol of the German approach to safety, thoughtful, preventative, and rooted in an understanding of how individual actions affect collective safety. This transition period also saw an increase in public awareness campaigns about safe driving, many of which emphasized the need for planning ahead. Graphics appeared in driving schools showing cars stranded on shoulders, illustrating the risks they posed. Radio announcements reminded motorists to fuel up before beginning long journeys. Even major automakers incorporated subtle reminders into user manuals. Germans were determined to integrate the rule into national consciousness so deeply that it would be remembered instinctively. By the late 1990s, the Autobahn had become the unified nation's pride. And with that pride came stories, scandals, and high-profile incidents that reinforced the importance of the no empty tank rule. One widely discussed event occurred near the city of Kassel in the early 2000s, when a famous television host ran out of petrol on the Autobahn during a holiday weekend. Traffic was already dense, and his stalled car created a domino effect that backed up vehicles for kilometers. Drivers fumed, news outlets dissected the situation, and safety experts used it as Exhibit A for explaining why the rule existed in the first place. When the host later apologized publicly, he admitted that he had underestimated his vehicle's consumption and had planned to refuel a bit later. That phrase, "a bit later," became a punchline in German newspapers for weeks. High-profile cases like this helped cement the law's reputation. It wasn't about punishing forgetful drivers. It was about preventing chaos in a system that relies on order. The Autobahn functions like a circulatory system in the body, and any unexpected blockage threatens the entire network. Germans came to see running out of fuel not merely as a lapse, but as an interruption of the country's heartbeat. Emergency responders also played a crucial role in shaping modern attitudes. The Autobahnpolizei, along with volunteer fire brigades and rescue services, operate with a level of efficiency that borders on choreography. When an incident occurs, responders arrive swiftly, secure the site, and restore flow as quickly as possible. These teams have seen everything from blown tires to catastrophic collisions, and they understand better than anyone why preventable stops are a problem. Rescue workers often recount moments where a single stalled car, left by a driver who misjudged their fuel range, contributed to a chain reaction of braking at high speeds. These stories circulate in training halls, safety workshops, and community talks. They serve as living reminders of why the no empty tank rule matters. The Autobahn is engineered for speed, but it is also engineered for safety. Every regulation is designed to maintain that balance, and rescuers, more than anyone else, know how fragile that balance can be. The early 2000s also saw advancements in vehicle technology that began to influence how Germans approach fuel management. Cars were increasingly equipped with range indicators showing how many kilometers remained until the tank was empty. Navigation systems offered routes with petrol stations marked along the way. Yet these technologies proved to be double-edged. Some drivers placed too much trust in their range calculations, treating them as promises rather than estimates. When those estimates turned out to be optimistic, they found themselves stranded and confused. And so officials had to remind drivers repeatedly that technology aids responsibility but does not replace it. Driving schools responded by adopting a mantra that would be repeated to new drivers for years. Never rely on the last kilometers. They trained students to consider refueling not when the tank ran low, but before it did. The idea was to instill habits that would remain reliable regardless of technological aids. This mindset spread across the country and became part of the unwritten social code of German driving. As Germany moved deeper into the 21st century, the empty tank rule developed a kind of dual identity. On one hand, it was taken seriously by motorists, police, and safety officials. On the other hand, it began appearing in travel trivia books, online compilations of unusual laws, and comedic travel videos. People found it amusing that a country known for engineering excellence could also be so uncompromising about something as basic as fuel levels. Tourists would shake their heads in disbelief. Comment sections on travel forums filled with curious questions. Could you really be fined for running out of fuel? Was this genuinely enforced? Or was it one of those urban legends that tourists retold until it became accepted fact? To the amusement of Germans, visitors rarely believed the law existed until they encountered it personally. Rental car companies began including printed explanations in English, French and Italian. Some agencies even highlighted the rule with a playful yet stern tone, warning customers to keep an eye on their gauge. The explanations often began with the phrase, "This is not a joke," because to many travellers it sounded like one. But what outsiders perceived as humour, Germans saw as logic perfectly applied. German culture values foresight. Running out of petrol is not a quirky mistake. It is a disruption of a meticulously designed system. And so enforcement continued, steady and consistent. Officers did not wield excessive power. They simply maintained order. They approached stranded drivers, assessed the situation, issued fines when appropriate, and ensured that the car was moved safely. Although the fines themselves are modest, the cultural weight of the rule is significant. German drivers internalize it as part of their identity. Running out of fuel is something they pride themselves in avoiding. Ask any German driver and they might even tell you about the small rituals they follow. Checking the gauge before entering the motorway, topping off the tank before long trips, or planning refueling points in advance. These practices reveal not fear of punishment, but pride in competence. The modern era also brought with it debates about speed limits. Environmental activists, safety advocates and politicians have repeatedly proposed introducing a nationwide limit on the Autobahn. Each time the debate becomes heated. Supporters of unrestricted speed argue that the Autobahn, when properly used, is safe and efficient. Opponents argue that even the best system has limits. Yet interestingly, both sides agree on the importance of rules like the empty tank regulation. Whether one favours or opposes speed limits, everyone understands the necessity of preventing avoidable hazards. The rule has become one of the few aspects of driving culture that transcends political divides. Germany's relationship with the Autobahn reflects broader themes within the national character: respect for order, appreciation for quality, and recognition that freedom thrives when supported by responsibility. The no empty tank rule embodies this philosophy in a surprisingly elegant way. It demands foresight without imposing excessive restriction. It encourages personal accountability while supporting the collective good. And it maintains a standard of safety that allows the Autobahn to remain one of the most efficient and respected motorway systems in the world. By the middle of the 2010s, the law had become so integrated into public consciousness that many Germans assumed it had always existed. It had become so natural that even people who questioned other driving regulations rarely questioned this one. Its survival through reunification, modernization, and technological evolution speaks to its effectiveness. Germany had found a rule that worked. And in a country where systems are designed with long-term stability in mind, a rule that works tends to endure. Even today, the Autobahn Polizei occasionally share stories that highlight the law's relevance. They speak of drivers cruising confidently until the engine abruptly sputters. They describe the frustration of motorists caught in unexpected traffic caused by a single-stranded vehicle. And they recount the looks of tourists who, upon learning about the fine, react with a blend of amazement and embarrassment. These stories continue to shape the cultural narrative. They remind Germans why the rule exists. They remind visitors that the Autobahn is not a stage for improvisation. It is a carefully calibrated machine. The no empty tank regulation stands as a symbol of Germany's driving ethos. It survived reunification because it was effective. It survived modernization because it was logical. And it survived the rise of technology because human judgment still matters. The rule remains a testament to the idea that small actions can have large consequences, and that safety is built not merely through engineering, but through collective responsibility. The Autobahn thrives because its users understand this, and the empty tank rule remains a small but vital thread in the larger tapestry of one of the world's most remarkable transportation systems. How the rule lives on in modern Germany, and why it still matters today. There is something uniquely fascinating about the way certain laws endure. Some rules survive because they are symbolic. Others survive because they are traditional. And a few laws, remarkably rare in the modern world, remain because they still work exactly as intended. Germany's prohibition against running out of fuel on the Autobahn belongs firmly in this last category. While the world around it has changed dramatically, while cars have evolved, roads have expanded, and driving behaviours have shifted, the principle behind the law has remained relevant. And so it persists, unchanged and quietly powerful, shaping the rhythm of German road culture well into the 21st century. To understand how this rule maintains its place in contemporary Germany, it helps to examine the broader context of modern mobility. Over the past decades, Germany has embraced new technologies at a rapid pace. Electric vehicles have become increasingly common. Ride-sharing apps have transformed urban transportation, and navigation apps now guide millions of drivers every day. Yet even with these advancements, the Autobahn remains a symbol of precision and discipline. It is a system built on the assumption that drivers behave predictably, responsibly, and with an awareness of how their actions affect others. In this environment, the rule against running out of petrol retains remarkable significance. It serves as a moral reminder that Germany's high-speed network is not a playground. It is a public infrastructure shared by millions of people, and its safety depends on the smallest of decisions. This idea, subtle yet powerful, has become woven into the identity of German motorists. The modern German driver is taught from the very beginning that foresight is part of the contract they enter when they take the wheel. Driving instructors continue to emphasize the importance of preparation, reminding students that a vehicle is not simply a machine to be controlled, but a responsibility to uphold. Lessons on motorway etiquette highlight fuel management as one of the key aspects of safe driving, placing it alongside lane discipline, mirror use, and emergency protocol. Students learn quickly that running out of fuel on the Autobahn is not a laughing matter. It is a symbol of carelessness, something no responsible driver wants associated with their name. Much of this mindset is reinforced by Germany's broader cultural attitude toward order. The Autobahn is not only a transport system, it is a national treasure. It represents engineering excellence, economic progress, and a level of civil discipline that many countries admire. Germans take immense pride in the fact that they can drive long distances at high speed with a sense of precision and safety unknown in much of the world. And with that pride comes the recognition that every driver plays a role in maintaining the system's integrity. What may surprise outsiders is that the rule is not enforced with a heavy hand. Most fines are modest, issued calmly, and often accompanied by a brief educational conversation. Police officers generally prefer to resolve the situation efficiently rather than turn it into a disciplinary spectacle. Their goal is not to punish, but to prevent future incidents. And in many cases, drivers who have been fined come away with a newfound respect for the logic behind the regulation, realizing for themselves why the rule is necessary. Tourists encountering this law for the first time often react with disbelief. Travel blogs, guidebooks and online forums crack jokes about the idea that Germany expects drivers to anticipate the future with mechanical precision. Some find it endearing, a sign of German thoroughness taken to remarkable extremes. Others treat it as a curiosity, a fact to share at dinner parties or mention in videos about strange global laws. But those who actually drive the Autobahn quickly discover that the rule makes perfect sense. High-speed travel demands a different level of attentiveness, and stopping unexpectedly is more than just rude, it is dangerous. Rental agencies in Germany have learned over the years to incorporate this rule into their orientation for foreign customers. Some companies deliver the warning politely, others with a humorous tone meant to ensure it's remembered. A typical briefing might include a casual reminder to refuel before entering the motorway, often followed by the phrase, "You really do not want to run out on the Autobahn." Employees deliver this line with a knowing smile, the kind of smile that suggests they have seen many tourists learn the lesson the hard way. These small reminders help ensure that visitors adopt a level of caution comparable to the locals. The rise of electric vehicles has introduced a new dimension to the conversation. Drivers of electric cars must think not only about their battery levels, but also about charging station availability. Germany has expanded its charging infrastructure significantly, but the principles remain the same. If a car runs out of battery power on the Autobahn, it is treated similarly to a petrol vehicle running dry. The reason behind the rule remains unchanged. Any vehicle that becomes immobilized on the motorway disrupts the flow and increases the chances of an accident. The introduction of electric mobility has simply reinforced the timelessness of the regulation's underlying logic. This brings us to an interesting aspect of the rule's longevity. While technologies evolve, human behavior remains surprisingly consistent. Drivers still make poor assumptions about their fuel ranges. They still choose to keep driving rather than stop for petrol. They still believe that the little blinking fuel light means they have more time than they actually do. And every year, despite decades of education campaigns, emergency responders still encounter vehicles abandoned on the shoulder with empty tanks or drained batteries. These situations illustrate how easily minor lapses can create major disruptions. A single stranded vehicle can cause traffic to slow suddenly, leading to braking waves, congestion or accidents. For the Autobahn Polizei, whose job is to prevent these hazards, the rule against running out of fuel remains a vital tool. It gives officers the authority to hold drivers accountable and prevent the chaos that follows from negligence. One of the more interesting consequences of the law is the role it plays in shaping the country's driving habits. Germans tend to refuel earlier than drivers in many other countries. They monitor their gauges more often. They plan fuel stops during long-distance journeys. And they speak openly about the importance of preparation. This cultural discipline contributes to the Autobahn's exemplary safety record, proving that high speed and high standards can coexist. Germany's national debates about road policy continue to evolve, but this regulation remains curiously untouched. Environmental activists advocate for lower emissions. Safety advocates campaign for speed limits. Automotive engineers push forward with autonomous driving technologies. And in the midst of all these heated discussions, the rule against running out of fuel sits quietly, uncontroversial and widely accepted. It is one of the few traffic regulations that has managed to escape political polarization, largely because it addresses a universal human truth. Mistakes happen, but some mistakes are too dangerous to allow. Modern Germans occasionally joke about the law, but the humor is affectionate. They appreciate the irony of a regulation that appears unusual yet makes perfect sense. In conversations, it often becomes a point of national pride, a small example of German efficiency at work. People speak of it not as an oppressive burden, but as a reflection of a culture that values competency. It is a rule that encourages responsibility rather than restricts freedom. And in a world where roads grow more congested and technology grows more complex, that kind of responsibility becomes increasingly important. The law's continued existence also highlights an interesting aspect of German legal philosophy. Germany rarely repeals regulations that still serve a purpose. Instead, useful laws become stable anchors in the legal system, accumulating cultural value over time. The no empty tank rule is one such anchor. It has survived war, division, reunification, modernization and societal transformation. It has outlasted countless political administrations, and it continues to shape the everyday behaviour of drivers across the country. For the average motorist in modern Germany, the rule is not something they think about daily. It simply forms part of the background logic of driving. But for the Autobahn Polizei, for emergency responders, and for road engineers, it remains a critical guideline that helps maintain one of the most advanced motorway systems on Earth. And whether or not drivers consciously reflect on it, the rule influences their actions and protects their safety. Today, the regulation stands not as a quirky remnant of bureaucratic overreach, but as a living testament to Germany's values. It reminds drivers that preparation is not optional, that their actions influence others, and that safety is a shared responsibility. And in the end, that is why the rule endures. It speaks to a cultural truth that transcends time. The Autobahn is fast, but it is not reckless. It is precise, but it is not inflexible. It offers freedom, but a freedom protected by discipline. And so the law remains in force in modern Germany, unchanged and uncontroversial. It continues to shape driver behaviour, inform safety practices, and uphold the integrity of a system admired around the world. As new generations learn to drive, as technologies transform the automotive landscape, and as Germany continues to innovate, the principle behind the rule remains as relevant as ever. A vehicle that stalls on the Autobahn is more than an inconvenience. It is a danger. And a system built on speed cannot afford avoidable hazards. The modern German driving experience reflects this truth. Drivers know that the Autobahn is a privilege, not a guarantee. They approach it with respect and preparation, understanding that the rules that govern it exist for a reason. The regulation against running out of fuel stands as a quiet reminder of that responsibility. It has become an integral part of Germany's road culture, a symbol of care, precision and cooperation. Many countries would struggle to maintain such a rule in the 21st century, but Germany's social trust and cultural cohesion allow it to thrive. It is a testament to what can be achieved when a nation collectively values foresight and accountability. And as long as the Autobahn remains a symbol of national pride, the law will continue to play its part, steady, reliable and deeply embedded in the fabric of German driving. Even now, as electric vehicles evolve, as battery technologies advance, and as the future of mobility becomes increasingly digital, Germany maintains the same expectation it always has. Be prepared, stay alert, and never underestimate the importance of something as simple as fuel. The law stands as a quiet but firm guardian of this philosophy. And as the decades continue forward, it will continue to protect the Autobahn, ensuring that it remains what it has always been, a masterpiece of speed, safety and shared responsibility.